one more time a good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much and appreciate seeing all of you here. I'm Stan Henderson. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Enrollment Management and Student Life at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. I am also a proud member of the AAUW chapter of Dearborn. So I'm not just here in a welcoming capacity, I'm here as a member. And I said, you know, you join the Dearborn chapter and you get put to work right away. So that's what I'm here for, is as a member of the chapter today, and I'm very pleased to do that. I'm very pleased to be a part of this incredibly important discussion. I had a very, very strong mother who was not able to go to college. She was never able to earn at the rate that she was capable of with the intelligence that she had. I have an even stronger spouse who has as one of her prime issues, I think I would say, is that 78 cents for every dollar kind of thing. So it's imbued in me. The topic of the day is imbued in me from when I was a child, and it's part of pillow talk at home as well. So it has great meaning to me, and I am appreciative of AAUW for sponsoring this very important panel today, the discussion. I am, as all of the Dearborn folks in the audience know, I am inordinately proud of the fact that the University of Michigan-Dearborn had the first student AAUW chapter. And the contributions that that chapter brings to this campus is cause for celebration for all of us who are members of AAUW chapters elsewhere. And we maintain that sense of pride with them, and I am proudly wearing my Abigail pin today as part of the uniform that Tina insists that we all have on. Right? This is, as I like to say, a campus of community rather than just an institution of higher education. And what we are about today and what you're going to be participating in is clearly an expression of community, where we are not just passive recipients of what is decided above. We are participants, we are members, we are contributors. We have an obligation in a community to make a difference. And the topic is one that we need to have a conversation about because it helps to inform us as members of this University of Michigan-Dearborn community and the larger community of which we're all a part as well. So I thank our distinguished moderator, Debbie Dingle. It's always a pleasure to have you on our campus. Thank you for coming. And for the members of the panel, thank you for your time. And I welcome you both to the community of higher education at the University of Michigan-Dearborn and into the community of AAUW. Thank you very much.
Awesome person, I'm telling you. I can't even tell you how much I appreciate her spending a Saturday or whatever day of the week afternoon on Christmas break with myself and another student of mine at Panera Bread for quite a few hours talking about this thing. I appreciate you for that first. Wow. And Stephanie, please, I appreciate her as well. Debbie Dingle is currently the president of D2 Strategies and chair of Manufacturing Initiatives, American Automotive Policy Council. She is an active civic and community leader in both Michigan and Washington, D.C., and is recognized nationally, is a recognized advocate for women and children. Now, I will not read this whole thing because you all are educated and you can read it yourself. I would like to introduce today's moderator for the panel because it's more important to hear from him than me. I now turn the rest of this event over to our moderator, Mrs. Debbie.
Thank you, Tracy. Well, good afternoon. It's good to be with all of you. And Tracy and I thank you, Tracy, for all the hard work that you've put into this. And it's a very important week that this be happening. And even as right after this, there's another women's event on campus at the University of Michigan that I suspect several of you or many of you will be going to. So I said to Tracy, we should target this to maybe go 4 to 5, and so that everybody can go to the next women's event. Oops. Tina. I keep calling her Tracy. I don't know why I do that. It's her sister. She looks like it is Tina, and I know that. I've called her Tracy since we've met. I just do it every. It's Tina. It's my fault. Anyway, but I'm tired too. But you are a Tracy in my head. But I also, last week I was with Susan as we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the University of Michigan-Dearborn's Women in Learning Leadership Program as well. So, which was another great night, and there were a lot of women, many whom I had not met before, in attendance. So that was exciting too. And we were also with but some others who I see here today. And I look at Kathy Stroud, who will remember Jerry Behrens. Jerry was there, and it was a night. Some of you are young, some of you are a little more seasoned, like I am. But Jerry Behrens was a woman that led many of us for a long time. When I was young, she was one of my mentors. And many of you have heard of the Detroit Athletic Club, but at the time that I was just beginning my career, women were not allowed in the front door of the Detroit Athletic Club, nor, quite frankly, to eat or be at many of the meetings. And Jerry led all of us in storming on the Detroit Athletic Club, and we left our heels at the front door because of the heels that were inside. So it was wonderful to be with her. But also, this week, as we are preparing this, and Susan's heard some of these remarks before, it's good that you're doing it this week, which on Tuesday we celebrate April 8th was Equal Pay Day. And you saw the film on Lily Ledbetter, but it really is bothersome. When I started, my career was interviewed for a job at General Motors. I was actually asked, why would a woman want to work at General Motors? And I think too many of us probably have stories from over the years. And the young women, I don't want you to take for granted what we have accomplished, and it is exciting that we as women now think we can be anything. And quite frankly, when I began my career, you didn't think you could be. I mean, the thought of a woman president or a woman Supreme Court justice, or quite frankly, I graduated from the Foreign Service School, and women weren't accepted and didn't have opportunities to be ambassadors, to even go into the State Department. It wasn't that long ago. I'm seasoned, but I'm not old. So that's one of the reasons why it is so important we talk about it today. And on April 8th, where we did celebrate Equal Pay Day, it marks how far into the new year women have to work to catch up with men's wages from the previous year. This year it was 98 days. 98 days. And how is it that in 2014, women have to work nearly 100 extra days to equal the wages that a man makes? It's a rude awakening for all of us, and it continues to be a frustrating reminder that despite our progress, and I think all of us would acknowledge that we've made a great deal of progress, the days of women facing discrimination in the workplace is not over. And why is it that we have such a difficult time getting the Congress to even vote on women should be paid equal to what a man is making? We're reminded that women in every corner of the country continue to suffer from the gender-based wage gap. It's present in all 50 states and in the 50 largest metropolitan areas. And what I also say to all of you is it's hurting our families and our economy. Women are the heart and soul of our communities. That's just a reality. We're the business leaders, we're entrepreneurs, politicians, mothers, and more. And we also are bringing home a growing share of families' income. Yet, we are nationally only paid 77 cents on the dollar for what a man is paid. And the disparity for women of color is even greater. Let's get Michigan specific. In Michigan, we only make 71.1 cents for every dollar a man does. Our state, Michigan, and I think this is one of the most abysmal things yet, as someone that loves my state, we are 42nd out of 50. 42nd out of 50, and when it comes to equal pay. So I say to you today, women in Michigan need a raise, and we need it now. So I thought what we would do is I'd introduce each of the people on this panel as we reflect about what it means to be a woman in the workplace in this day and age. Each of us has our own stories. Have each person sort of reflect and give their comments, and then maybe do some Q&A, if that makes sense. So I think our first speaker is Jan. I'm going to go in the order that Tina has it here. I got it right this time, Tina. I don't know why, I just still always want to say Tracy. And introduce Janet Denise Watkins, who, after an extensive undergraduate work at Wayne State University, she worked at General Motors for a long career like I did. She actually beat me by a year. She retired in 2005, and she's currently serving as the American Association of University, Michigan's 44th president, and its first African-American woman of color elected to that position. She's also co-chair of the Detroit branch. So, Janet, we're glad you got here in Southfield traffic, and we look
Yes.
forward to your comments.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Debbie. It's an honor to be here with this esteemed panel. I thank Tina for inviting me to participate in this event. As we know, it's been a very eventful few days with the signing of the executive order by President Obama to ensure that workers at the federal contracted level would receive opportunities to find out how much their counterparts and their co-workers are getting paid. So that's a big thing. But then the following day, we had, just a reversal of it in so many ways, with the Republicans not passing the Paycheck Fairness out of committee. Once again, the filibuster got in the way of that. I started my career, like Debbie, at General Motors about 30, well now, at the time I retired, it was 34 years. I've been retired since 2005. My experience there, like a lot of our contemporaries, women, was not always fair, in the sense that you were not being paid what was your coworker, your male coworker's salary. My own personal experience that I'd like to share is I had an opportunity for a promotion very early on in my career at General Motors. I was attending school. I was working for one of the major divisions, and I was in fact asked to interview for this particular position. It was a technical position. I like technical things, so I found it of interest, and I applied for it. And went through the interview and got a call back for it. And my supervisor at the time refused to let me go. And his reason for refusing to let me go was that I could not be promoted before he was. Now, he was white male. He was not going to school. He had a high school degree. He was my boss. He was my supervisor. And unfortunately, the manager did not support the move either. So when I look at that over the course of a career, when you look at other women who are found in that same position, over the course of a lifetime, you're talking about a lot of money lost, a lot of opportunities to not only achieve career goals, but to also achieve certain financial goals. I would like to say, before I pass it on to my friend here next to me, I'd like to throw out a few numbers: 77, 74, 65, 56, and 2058. They're not lottery numbers. They are, in fact, the percentages that women are making at 77% nationally on the dollar. 71%, as Deborah said earlier. I have 74 based on some other statistics, but 74% on the dollar for
71
Michigan.
was the number just released. We're going down.
Going down. And 65% for women of African American descent. 56% for Hispanic women. In 2058, based on the current research, is the year that we expect to reach parity. So, you know, those are sobering numbers for us all, but in particular for the young women in the room. I would urge you to vociferously contact your elected officials and let them know that you do not want to find yourself 40 years from now waiting on to reach parity in pay. I will turn it to you.
I wrote down all those numbers and I'm going to buy a lottery ticket. First of all, I should tell you that I'm not making faces at the audience. I'm just having a really hard time with these lights. There are a couple members of the audience that I am making faces with, but not any of you. My name is Sally Barnett, and I have come from a different background than these two ladies. I was fortunate enough to work my entire career in the public sector, and for the first third of my career, pay equity was not an issue to me. Didn't think anything of it. As I was preparing remarks for this presentation today, a friend called and she asked me the question, how do we make men aware of the pay equity issue? And I thought about that and thought about it, and I said, well, it's not really a woman's issue. As President Obama said, it's a family issue. 40% of all the households that have children are headed by a female. The woman is the main breadwinner, or she's the primary breadwinner. So it's a family issue. It's not just a woman's issue, and I think we need to keep that in mind. Men certainly have a stake in this as well. I've had something of a checkered career. I started out as a high school teacher and worked for about 13 years as a high school teacher, and in that setting, pay equity was not so much an issue because we were in a unionized environment, and I think that was a big advantage to me. I knew because the salary schedule was negotiated, it was printed in the contract. It's a matter of public information. You can request it through the Freedom of Information Act. You could probably go online and find out what your kids' teachers are making. So I knew that the guy down the hall, who was also a high school teacher with 4 years of experience and a master's degree, was making exactly the same thing that I was. Maybe he was making more because he had some coaching jobs or something, but pay equity wasn't so much the issue. That's not to say that there weren't issues of inequality in a unionized environment. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I'll tell you 3 stories where this is played out, and I would say they fall into 2 different areas. One is in the area of work environment, working conditions or work environment, and the other is in the area of advancement. In terms of work environment, as a new teacher, I became interested in the union and got involved in the union, and I remember one of the very first grievances that I was involved in had to do with the fact that one of our elementary teachers came to work. This would have been in the early 70s, long time ago, way past, some of you don't remember that at all, but she came to work. She had the audacity to show up in a pantsuit. And they were very popular in the 70s, and for those of you who don't know what a pantsuit is, it's a suit, you know, a nice blouse, a nice jacket, and pants, not a skirt. And her principal, a male, sent her home. And she went home. She went home and filed a grievance. Her husband was the president of the union, so he picked on the wrong name. But he did. And she won the grievance. And what came out of that grievance was the union and the administration sat down and really drew up a dress code. And the thing that I remember now, thinking back on it, that's interesting, women were now allowed, permitted, to wear slacks. Not slacks, I'm sorry, a pantsuit. It had to be a coordinated outfit. You couldn't wear slacks. Now, all of this did not apply to men teachers. Nobody thought they needed to tell men what to wear to work, but they apparently thought they needed to tell women what to wear to work. On a little more serious note, I also remember in the later 70s a grievance that at the time it was the practice, not only in the school district where I worked, which will go unnamed, but is close by, very close by. Women were required, if you got pregnant, you had to get out of the classroom. You had to leave the classroom by the 5th month. Kids couldn't see that. That would just be indecent for a child to see a pregnant woman in front of them. And if you were fortunate enough to be a tenured teacher, you could take a leave of absence. It was an unpaid leave, and you lost seniority. That's going to impact, seniority is an important factor in terms of job assignments, in terms of possibility of layoffs. It's an important commodity. So you take that seriously. And it's important in terms of your retirement down the line, because your retirement's dependent on how much you make, how many years you work, things like that. If you were not a tenured teacher, if you were a probationary teacher, you were forced to quit. You were fired. And that was a grievance that the union took up and won the grievance. And seniority dates were adjusted. If you were already terminated, nothing was done about that. But the union was instrumental in fighting some of these issues. So in terms of the work environment, there were certainly issues of inequity. And in terms of promotion, it was certainly typical that in the school, the teachers, at an elementary school, it was just almost universal, the teachers were female, the principal was male. Now at the high school level, there were more female teachers, but the principal, the assistant principal, was always male. So some of the women felt at the school that I worked, when the assistant principal was absent, he would tap one of his buddies to sit in and be the assistant principal, and his job was mainly student discipline, as I recall. Some of the women on the staff felt this isn't fair, this isn't right. Well, we don't use that F word, fair. That some of the women marched down to his office and said, you know, how come you always pick the guys to fill in? Don't you think we could do this job? And so there were some women who he fortunately took it to heart and began to ask some of the women to step in so that they could have the opportunity to get that kind of experience. God knows why they didn't want it, but some of them did, and some of them did a very good job. Right, Ann? Mm-hmm. Ann was one of those people, and she quickly learned she didn't want to be an assistant principal when she grew up. I worry, frankly, that as the power of unions diminishes, as unions, because they're a vehicle for people to have equity in the workplace, a vehicle for people to speak up, I worry that we're going to be taking a step backwards in this state, and certainly workers are, but that's a whole nother issue. After about 13 years in the classroom, I decided that I was going to get more involved in the union, and I decided to run for the position of president of my teachers union. I think it was about 1,000 members at the time, so it was a fairly good size group. And it wasn't easy to get elected because you had to convince not only men to vote for you, But a lot of my female colleagues who thought, no, only a man can do that job, a woman can't be president of the union. But I did get elected and I did serve. So far, I was the longest serving president of the union, and I'd like to think that I made it a little bit easier for the Chris Sipperleys, who's now the president of the union, to take that job and to do a good job with it. After about 13 years of that, 12 or 13 years in that position, I went over to the dark side and decided that I would go into administration. I was finishing up my doctorate at Wayne State University, and an opportunity came up at Henry Ford Community College, and I became the Director of Human Resources at HFCC. There, I had the opportunity to work with more unions, not just those that represented faculty. And I remember that's when I first came up against the whole notion of pay equity. Our support staff union, and this was a union, it was a good-sized union that was not only in the K-12 school district, but also at the community college. The union represented secretaries, lunchroom workers, bus drivers, some pretty highly skilled technicians, some skilled trades, so it was what's called a wall-to-wall or an umbrella organization. It represented a lot of different workers. And when one of the things that was very controversial about their contract, their union president had come out of the ranks of custodial staff. He was a custodian. He had been president for a very long time. And custodians, who at that time, you didn't even need a high school education to get a custodial job, they made more money than the secretarial staff. And many of the secretaries ran offices, ran departments, truly, and had, as a job requirement, an associate's degree. That didn't get changed until the women got together and said, it's time to make some changes, and they got themselves organized within their union and elected a woman president. And she was able to sit down with the administration, and we negotiated, finally, pay equity. Long time coming, and it wasn't necessarily easy to do. And certainly there are lots of examples at the university level in terms of advancement. I mentioned advancement where women are denied tenure, and maybe the next person will speak a little bit to that. When I became the director of HR, of human resources at Henry Ford Community College, that was at that time pretty much a male bastion as well. I would go to professional conferences. There were 29 community colleges in the state of Michigan at the time, and the vast majority, it was a man who was in charge of human resources. I'm pleased to say that changed. By the time I retired in 2006, I think it was that I retired, 2007, 2006, at the professional conferences, it was a majority of women who were heading up the human resources offices. So that was an area where I've seen some change. I was going to retire in 2006, but the Board of Trustees made me an offer I couldn't refuse and asked me if I would step in and be the interim president of the college. And I was the first president, albeit interim, of Henry Ford Community College. So I was very proud of that, and I think back on it, and I think my mom, who wanted so much to be a teacher, but her parents said, we're not sending a girl to college, what a waste of money, she would have been very proud of that. So with that, let me go back to the question initially, how do we get men on board? And I think one of the things you have to do is be armed with information and statistics. And there are two sources of information that I wanted to point out to you. One is the Department of Labor. If you go to dol.gov, they publish the monthly labor review. There are lots of statistics and information about workers and industry and so on from the Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the other one is the AAUW, so here comes another commercial. AAUW.org, they have done some tremendous research, some very solid research on the area of pay equity. There are 2 publications, and I'm not giving them up. So you have to go to the website and get them yourself. First one, The Simple Truth About the Gender Pay Gap. This is the 2013 edition. And you can get a copy of that and should get a copy of that. If you're a student getting ready to graduate, Graduating to a Pay Gap, this is another book that's very, very helpful, and you should have this. You should also take advantage of the Smart Start workshops that are going on campus. So with that, I talked too long, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
you're great. Thank you. Well, it's great to be here, and I want to thank Women in Learning and Leadership and the AUW for organizing this wonderful event, and it's an honor to serve with these panelists. And I just want to say I corroborate how useful this AUW data is. I incorporate it into a lot of my classes. So go to their website and check out the research they've done on the pay gap. It's fantastic. So I'm Suzanne Bergeron, and I'm a professor here. I'm the director of Women's and Gender Studies, but what a lot of people don't know about me is I have a PhD in economics, which is a fairly male-dominated field. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about just some stories about working in a sort of male-dominated field and a couple of stories from academia. But then I want to spend most of my time really talking more generally about some of the structural issues that women face with the pay gap, focusing on the so-called, what we might call explicit discrimination, as well as the so-called choices that women make that many people claim are the real reason for the pay gap. But I'm going to explain that that concept of choices needs to be put in quotation marks. So when I started my PhD at the University of Notre Dame, I was a scholarship recipient. But in my second year, I had to get an assignment, either be a teaching assistant or a research position. And that is when I found out that all assignments were handed out on the basketball court. And I'm only 5'1", but that wasn't the real problem. That the male professors and the male students would get together, and they would decide who did research or teaching assistantship for who, and then the female students got the leftovers. I also found out that after that first year, when I asked to be part of the committee to look at applications, that the school, Notre Dame, had asked everyone to send in pictures, and the committee of, now this is a wonderful program I went to, I'm very happy with my education, but the committee of faculty and students who were vetting applications would rate the female applicants on their looks. So I just want to say that during my time at Notre Dame, I'm just going to say that I changed things. That no longer were assignments made on the basketball court after I found out about that. And I am proud of being a rabble-rouser when I have to. And let's just say that was the time when I had to do it. And that's often how things go in, the male world. So fast forward a few years, I get this PhD in economics through a very nonlinear path. And one thing I want to say too, seeing a lot of students in the room, is that many people think that women's success and career success comes from pursuing a linear path, but as we saw from, for instance, Sally's story, that's not often the case. So students will always say to me, oh, I'm a failure, I didn't get my bachelor's degree by the age of 24, and your life is going to take you on a lot of twists and turns, and people often find themselves, I didn't get my PhD till I was 38 years old, and now I have the best job in the world. So that's just a little something I wanted to pass on.
And I'm still working on mine.
And we hope you get it, Debbie.
It's called the 20-year plan now.
Yes, talk about a nonlinear career path. You are the exemplar. So let's fast forward a few years to a university very close to here, and I'm on the tenure track. And I'm hired the same year as this very nice man in history, who I won't name, he's still here, a history professor. And I publish a book, he publishes a book. I get an article in a prestigious journal, he gets an article in a prestigious journal. I get a grant from Ann Arbor, he gets a grant from Ann Arbor. But the difference is that every time something good happened to this professor, the chair of our department would send out a notice to the whole department saying, congratulations, professor, on so-and-so on this wonderful achievement. And then, and when the same thing would happen to me, you could hear the crickets chirping. So this happened one year, and I thought it's just an oversight. And it happened a second year, and I started to get steamed. And the third year, I finally went in and talked to the chair. And the chair said, "Oh, Suzanne, you see, I want to surprise everyone when you come up for tenure with your wonderful record, and that is why I haven't announced these things." And I said, "Why would you do my male colleagues such a disservice then by announcing to the whole campus every achievement that he had?" And my chair said to me, "Suzanne, people don't like women who are braggarts." And then I said very evenly, "Like is treated the same." Those are legal words. And then we were treated the same after that. So these are the kinds of things often when we talk about women's success in academia, that it's these small, sometimes subtle differences in treatment that can often result in big differences in how people evaluate your scholarship and whether you're seen as worthy of tenure or not. So that's just something I want to point out. And, this wasn't a bad, this is a good guy. This was a guy who really cared about fairness, but he didn't even see in himself that this was a problem. So I have a lot of other things to say, but really I've lived in the past 20 years in the rarefied world of academia, and the last 15 at the University of Michigan, which is deeply committed to equity. Like other people on this panel, for instance, Sally, our pay is completely transparent, it's public record, and I want to say because of that, I know how vitally important it is that we pass that law that makes it possible for women to find out what the pay of their colleagues is so that they can get a fair shake. Because I have always known what the pay is of my colleagues, I've been able to bargain for equity, raises, and so forth all along. I just think transparency is really important. We also have wonderful parental leave here at the University of Michigan-Dearborn, and in the time I've been here, as many men as women have taken that parental leave and have been the primary caretakers for their infant children. So that's a huge equity issue. So I want to talk not so much about my experience, which has been so incredibly positive and fair because of the University of Michigan-Dearborn, to talk about more structural issues that face women generally in the United States. Starting first by talking about some examples of what we would call outright or explicit discrimination in pay, hiring, and promotions, and then talking about the so-called choices women make, and showing you that those are also choices that are made in the context of sex discrimination. So even though I said academia is a pretty rarefied place, recently, in the last couple of years, there was a study of psychology resumes, curriculum vitae, as we call them in academia, where researchers sent out CVs of psychologists to departments across the United States, the exact same CV with a male name and a female name. And what they found was that people tended to rank the ones with the male name at the associate professor level and the ones with the female name at the assistant professor level, which is a lower level. So that shows that there's still some outright discrimination, maybe it's unconscious, that might even happen in academia. When I told my neighbor last night that I was coming here, she mentioned to me that she went to her boss a couple weeks ago for a raise, and he said that he wouldn't give her one because he needed to save the salary for the men who were going to go take care of their families. Yes. So she works for a Fortune 500. So that's another piece of evidence. And then there's evidence from the legal cases, over 500 of them brought in the last 10 years by the EEOC. And as you saw in the Lily Ledbetter video, when she said if she was going to open up this fair pay case, it was going to take 8 years. It is not a piece of cake to open up an EEOC complaint and see it all the way through. So that we've had these 500 discrimination cases brought successfully showing discrimination over the last 10 years is pretty sad, I guess. I'll give you an example of one of these cases, Beck versus Boeing. There was a case brought by both hourly and salaried women at Boeing that charged the company was paying them less and overlooking them for promotions. And a statistical analysis was done that corroborated this. So throughout that whole company, women were paid less. So these are some examples of outright discrimination. I'll end with one more example, and that's the famous study of gender gaps in science faculty at MIT, which found that women were given less space for research, fewer named chairs, fewer awards, lower salaries, and less plum committee assignments, even when when compared to men of the same quality, research quality. And it showed that these small differences, just 20 feet less square space in the lab, would end up in, over the course of someone's career, huge differences in pay, access to grants, and all that. Okay, so that's explicit discrimination. But many people, including labor economists, people who write in the Wall Street Journal, they would tell you that explicit discrimination is really only part of the story of the pay gap, and it really only reflects maybe 25–30% of that pay gap that we're talking about. And the rest of the pay gap, and this was even admitted by a member of Obama's Council of Economic Advisors 3 days ago, said, well, it's not outright discrimination that determines the entire pay gap. It only makes up about a third of it. But a lot of people say, well, this other piece of the pay gap, this reflects women's choices to do more flexible work, choices to be at home with children, choices to go into careers that don't pay as well. And so therefore, because it reflects women's choices, that aspect of the pay gap is not unfair. So what I want to talk a little bit about, just for a couple minutes, and I'd like to hear what you think about this, is how some of these so-called choices are actually related to sex discrimination. And so I'm going to talk about two instances of this. The first is education and career choice. So a lot of people say women just don't go into those high-paid careers, and that's why we have a pay gap, and that's women's choice. But I would say we really need to think about how girls and women are tracked into different careers in the first place, starting in infancy with toys, guidance counselors, and that has a huge impact on people's career choice. But further, as Sally pointed out so clearly in her example, it's not that women are choosing to go into easier careers. It's that the careers that women go into are undervalued. So, as Sally pointed out, are janitors really worth more than secretaries? Do they really have more responsibility, have more skills than secretaries? Payrolls say they do. But a statistical measure called comparable worth actually tells us they don't. Comparable worth is a way of measuring the skill level, the the compensating differential, how dangerous the job is, how much responsibility you have of various jobs. And what comparable worth studies show us is that jobs women do are undervalued. That women actually get paid less for doing jobs that often have higher responsibility and higher skill levels than quote-unquote male jobs. And I don't know if you're familiar with the great degree of occupational segregation in the U.S. labor force. About 80% of women are in female-dominated jobs. So this is an important thing to note. And one reason why 2/3 of those making the minimum wage are women is because of this undervaluing of women's work. The fact that we pay daycare workers the minimum wage, it's just a travesty. I want to just make a point that we need to also think about how this falls on different groups, and certainly we know that women of color make even far less than white women, maybe about 65 cents to the dollar. I'm in the ballpark there. But I just got some hot off the press research today about same-sex LGBTQ folks that regarding how the minimum wage might affect their pay, because very often LGBTQ folks are discriminated against and are tracked into jobs that are undervalued. And it's a new research study just came out today that shows that poverty rates would be cut in half for LGBTQ folks if the minimum wage went up to $10.10, as we're discussing. So just something to keep in mind. Second, I want to talk about, so that was about occupations, occupational segregation, the devaluing of women's work. The second thing I want to talk about is women's career paths. Now, Terry Lynn Land, who you might have heard of because she's from Michigan, had the very bad timing of saying a couple of days ago that the reason why women are paid less is because they choose flexible jobs because they really want to be mommies. Oh boy. And so I really want to take on this idea of flexibility. I do want to say that in the absence of structural support for working parents, it often means that one parent has to take time out of the workforce to take care of children, or sometimes aging parents themselves. And in heterosexual two-parent households, that parent often ends up being the woman, either because of stereotypes that that's women's work, and women are natural carers, but also because if men are earning a higher wage, families take less of a hit if it's the woman who is the one who steps out of the labor force. So it's the pay inequities that already exist that then kind of keep this in motion. It's not necessarily that women prefer or choose to stay at home with children, although I feel we could learn from policies in other countries. And while the Family and Medical Leave Act is better than what we had before, it is unpaid, and it is very short time, and we can look at examples of other countries where people will have 9 months of paid leave after they have a child, and will not be penalized, will not lose their job. So we could do better. Let's see. And let me just finally turn to the question of flexible work and Terry Lynn Land's statement. This idea that women choose flexible work because it makes it easier to be mothers does not understand the nature of flexible work at all. When we actually look at jobs that are flexible, they're often in the secondary tier of the labor market, they're the lowest paid jobs, and they're not flexible for the women. They're flexible for the employer. So this sort of statement just makes me crazy, and I had to talk about it. And all the research done by labor economists backs up what I just said. Now, it is true that on average, female full-time workers put in 2 hours of work less per week than male full-time workers. And you probably know that the 77 cents comparison compares full-time workers to full-time workers, compares apples to apples, right? But men do work an average of 2 hours more per week than women. Well, because women do often have those care responsibilities of either children or parents or whatever. And for sure that hours differential affects the pay gap. But we again have to connect this to the lack of support for family obligations that constrain women's choices. So I really encourage you, if you ever hear anyone say to you, the reason why we have a pay gap is not because of inequity, but because of women's choices, you need to challenge that and say those choices are made under significant constraints that we could improve through policy interventions. And so I just want to repeat what was said on the panel. Write to your legislators, get this thing sorted out. But let's open it up. I'm done.
We'll go a little past 5. Because it was a lot of great ideas, and Susan got to a lot of the points that I was going to make. Let me ask each of you very quickly, what advice would you give to a young woman right now, starting out in their career?
Well, I would say, one, certainly look at what careers you are choosing. Because we do know and understand that some of the higher paid career career choices are in areas like STEM. And so that's one of the things I would say. But also be armed with information, negotiate, go in knowing your value and not being afraid to ask for what you're worth. And that is huge. Developing that confidence and understanding that you are bringing to this employer a set of skills, experience, education that is often comparable, sometimes exceeds your male counterpart. If you walk in understanding that, then you go into it with strength. And it's very surprising. Me personally, over my career, another experience that I had was with negotiating my salary after I in fact got a promotion later on in my career at General Motors. And the position that I went into, I wanted some more money. And the amount of money that I was asking for at the time wasn't that significant, but it was enough. It was significant enough for me. And I did. I went in and I said, well, you know, that's nice. That's a great salary, appreciate it, but I need this. And they looked at it and they looked at me and they said, okay. So that there, I mean, and at that time, I would tell you, that was back in, I guess I'll date myself, back in the 80s. But being able to stand in that space of knowing what I was worth and not being afraid to ask for it did incredible things, not only for me, but over time I could share that experience with the women that, you know, was coming up behind me. So don't be afraid to ask. Know your worth, negotiate it. The only thing that they can say is no.
Sally?
I would advise you to go into something that you really love. Don't follow a career because you think this is going to make the most money for me. You're going to be unhappy. So pick something you really like. When I went to college, and I would also tell you to go in with confidence. And I wasn't the most confident kid going to college. But when I went to college, I wasn't thinking about becoming a high school teacher or a union president or going into human resources. That wasn't my plan at all. I was going to be the greatest living chemist of the Western Hemisphere. And then I took chemistry. And I really struggled with it. But one of the things that I struggled with was the fact that I was in a class with 500 students. And of the 500, literally 5 of us were women and all the rest were men. They were either pre-med or pre-engineering. I found that terribly intimidating. I stuck with it. I struggled. I got through the class. I got a C, but I got through the class. And when I looked around at the end of the class, there were probably about 100 students left. So a few of those guys must have been intimidated too. But I didn't stick with chemistry. I didn't really love it. I wasn't really passionate about it. I was passionate about history. And so do follow your dream. Do go in with confidence. And I think there are some statistics here that thank you to the AAUW quick facts here. The most dramatic change among undergraduates, 57% of the student body in 2010 was female. That's up from 42% in 1970. The proportion of female graduate students grew from 35% to 59% during the same period. The most dramatic change occurred in medicine, law, and business, where the proportion of women shot up from 9% in 1970 to around 47% in 2009-2010. During 2009-2010 school year, women earned 57.2% of all bachelor's degrees, 60.3% of all master's degrees, and 51.7% of all doctorate degrees. So don't let anybody tell you you can't do it.
But I'll tell you what, it's going down now. That's,
Really?
when I was preparing for your speech, both the law and the medical school numbers are going down. We were up, and it's going in the other direction now.
I want to strike a middle ground about the career choice thing to say, really do research into careers you are choosing, and also follow your dream. So I really want to be an economic anthropologist, and there were no jobs in anthropology. So I really did my homework and my research. Someone said you can be a development economist and do some of the same things and actually get a job. So I followed my dreams. But I did it in a very savvy way. So I would say for young people starting out in your careers now, do your research about career trends, and that also means network with people in a career you might think you want to go into, find out more about it from them. I'm gonna probably steal Debbie's thunder when I say here, mentoring is so important.
I was gonna, right.
So I'll let you talk about that, but I'll just throw it out there. And Debbie can tell you a little bit more about some of her great mentoring experiences. But my main advice is, really do your research when you're thinking about negotiating starting pay, negotiating your position in the firm. Really coming armed with a lot of information will do you a world of good.
And I think women are uncomfortable asking for an increase, asking for a raise. That's traditionally, we've been there, and we don't do it as well as men do. We get embarrassed, we just feel like it's not something that you should talk about, and the men do not feel that, and that's one of the many differences that you see in the workplace. And also, I think that this is changing to some extent. When I was younger, I still wish to think of myself as young, but at General Motors, I really had several incidences of sexual harassment. Really unacceptable. That would end. People would, if I had sued now, would have made a lot of money on it, and was told as a woman that I was not valued. If I complained, that I would be labeled a troublemaker. And I will tell you that 30 years ago, if as a woman executive, I probably would have given another woman the same advice. If you did complain, or you wouldn't have. I was told if I would never get ahead at General Motors. And by the way, that was true. Now, I think that the climate is changing and that we need to support each other, but times are changing, but you've got to be sensitive about how you're perceived and how you approach issues. And I'm very honest about that. I do believe women need to mentor women. I believe that we, too often, that when women are competitive or they're in the workplace, they feel competitive with each other, and instead of giving a hand and helping someone up, we don't help one another enough. That's one of the things that I believe very strongly. I also believe that men are as critical to mentoring as women are. Quite frankly, they're better placed many times to help mentor. I think in politics, I like to tell the story that Steve Yokich was president of the UAW and probably helped me more than anybody did at putting me at the table with the big boys. And it was right after NAFTA had passed in the United States Congress, and we were in the 2000 presidential election year. And Al Gore called and asked Steve if the UAW would then, could they move on and would they consider endorsing him? And Steve said, Debbie Dingell will represent me. And when a man empowers you that way, it's a very empowering, and they take you seriously, and you suddenly are there. So look for people that will mentor you, male and female, and give you good advice. And always make sure you have somebody that'll give you real good advice. That you don't want someone that's always going to tell you what you want to hear. You need someone who's going to tell you what you need to hear. So I'm looking at the clock. And shall we see, do we want to open this up and probably do another 5 minutes or so before does anybody have any questions? Uh-huh.
A lot of success has to do with what takes place in the hours after work. Who can stay and play basketball with the people in the office, or who has to pick up the kid at 6 o'clock because daycare starts charging $15 a minute or whatever it is afterwards.
Or during the day when the men are on the golf course and you're still in the office.
Well, that too. I was just wondering if anybody has any comments about that. This almost seems insoluble. Somebody's got to do that. If there are two parents at home, somebody has to pick up the kid. And probably the people.
Well, I think those are things you work out at home with your spouse, and I'm thinking about that baseball player whose name I don't know.
yeah, that's
Who
right.
just, what a wonderful story that was. He took 3 days off for the birth of his child, and it was so controversial. But,
And I think I do think it's generational. I do think you're beginning to see some, not always, it's cultural too, but it's amazing that over when I'm at Ann Arbor with some of the young doctors, male and female, and some of the young lawyers, the men are accepting equal, if not more, responsibility. And I've met more men, quite frankly, that are quitting their jobs and are willing to stay home. It's beginning. And it's every relationship. And it's a cultural change that we've slowly got to see. And it does have to. Unfortunately, there are too many women heads of households that are in situations where they don't even have that luxury. And they're, quite frankly, making less money to begin with. And the penalty is even greater.
Just on that point, I also think that there's a lot of pressure on men and on the constraints on how we as a society allow males to be perceived as being successful males. And right now, going home and picking up the kids because they're sick is not perceived as a male success strategy. And so that becomes a very equally as difficult and as damaging for them. And as I raise my son, having raised 2 daughters, just that consciousness of what are his challenges, what choices can he go into, what career is he expected to go into, how long do we expect him to work? Nobody's saying, well, work for 10 years, take a break, get back in, be flexible. I mean, you just basically say to your lads, knuckle down, and at 65, you can get out and drop dead. What is that all about? I mean, as a society, we've created such an antagonistic, genderized difference that it's really hard for kids, women and young men, to navigate what's acceptable. Are the rest of us going to support them? Well, that's great, good on you. I mean, so I think it's equally as hard for
I
young
think
men
we
as
all
it is for
agree.
young women. That was just something I think, as women,
that's a good point.
we talk about women and how we can help other women, and I think we have to help our men as well. I think that's just so vital.
I've been reading a really great book that I would like to recommend. It's by Dr. Leonard Shlain, Shlain. The book is called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And what he does is this wonderful, brilliant, elegant read of history and how literacy undermined the power of women in societies. And we all know literacy is, the benefits of literacy are incontestable. We know what those benefits are. But his point is that at the advent of that was where women began to not be included in the power structure because men were the only ones that got to learn to read. And so they were the ones that got to write the laws. And they were the ones that got to determine the direction of the culture. So to your point, Carolyn, it is a paradigm shift that is necessary, I believe, too, before a lot of what we're facing as women and families can change. Now, how that happens and how fast it happens, we know that that's a slow process. But it's something to consider when you're looking at how laws are written and who writes them, because far too often the laws are coming off the pen of our male counterparts.
Can I just respond to Carolyn's point? That's great. I just taking it in a different direction. As I said earlier, one of the things I've observed here at UM-Dearborn is a number of men, because it is available that the male professors are taking the time off to do that early infant care, because we have parental leave, not just mother's leave. when we look at policies like this cross-nationally, so countries that adopt this, you take a case like Sweden, where men can get access to parental care leave for their children, but they have to take it within the first 2 years of the child's birth. What research shows is that these men then become very, very bonded with their children, and then they start to take, and that really responds to Jane's point too, and then they start to really take those family responsibilities seriously and start thinking about work-life balance differently. So I don't mean to be policy-centric, but I think if you have laws and policies in place that create a different kind of playing field, we would start to see a real ramping up of different sorts of identities and outcomes in this regard. I mean, we have a masculine-centered workplace that assumes everyone has a wife at home. It doesn't have to be that way.
We've got to slowly change. I want to make one point because that I do also think is important for women, which is when you take and accept a job, make sure you can do the job. Because there was a time, or there still is a time, that some women will be promoted into jobs that they're not ready for. And when they don't do a good job, they hurt us for generations. And while we've all been talking about the challenges and the women being the caregivers, you can't abuse it either. I had a woman that I was aware of in the workplace that very much went after a job that she wanted to be in a manager position, and then, quite frankly, was taking 1 to 2 days off a week, at least. And at some point, you can't manage the job when you're out that often. And then you're a woman, you need to understand and be supportive. We need to make sure the jobs are getting, we've got to, if somehow, Susan, I don't know if you've talked about this a lot, but we also need to perform the job. And if you're not, you've got to be careful to not take a job you can't perform at, because you will ultimately hurt women for a long time. Tina? Go. No.
Sorry to interrupt, but Tina's giving me the sign that we're going to officially wrap the panel, and then we'll have plenty of time for you to stay around and have discussion, get something to eat afterwards. But let me do the official wrap and thank our moderator, Debbie Dingwell, and our panelists, Janet Watkins, Sally Barnett, and Suzanne Bergeron. Please give them a round of applause. I'm Program Manager in the Women's Resource Center, and I'm also very happy to be the staff advisor to the AAUW student organization here. This evening's panel has been sponsored by AAW Student Board and also by Women in Leadership and Learning. And Tina is the president of AAUW, and Amani Bird was here. She's the chair of WIL. And all week, I don't know how much you know, but this has been Pay Equity Week here at University of Michigan-Dearborn. And we had Paint the Rock to raise awareness. We had an interesting flash mob / dancing with our signs on the University Center stage to raise awareness. We are having Start Smart salary negotiation tomorrow to give our students, individual students, the skills they need to get out there and maybe do something about that pay equity discrepancy as they're first entering the workforce. And then also, we want to raise awareness of how you can make policy change on the national level, and I think our panels address that. I'll give another plug to aauw.org, where you can sign up for action alerts, and so you'll get them in your email. This is the time to maybe write a letter or send an email to your congressman, do something on the state level, that kind of thing. So again, I want to thank our panelists, and
Can I say very quickly, because if I don't say this, my AAUW colleagues will probably beat me down. On April 29th, we will be at the state capitol in the Rotunda rallying with our legislators to talk about passing pay equity legislation. We have a package of bills at the state capitol that we've been trying to get passed for a few years. So we are looking for as many people to participate in that event. It's April 29th. There will be a legislative pay equity briefing at 9:30, and then we'll go over to the state capitol from noon until 1, and there'll be a panel of speakers, legislators coming in. But please come out. And one other thing, myequalpay.wordpress.org. You can go there, click the Take Action link, click the Take Action link, and contact your state legislators. Let them know, pass pay equity legislation in Michigan now.